You know, in all my time doing content, I can't believe that I've never done a revamped top 10 favorite films of all time list, but I'm gonna do that today. Dadgummit, I think it's a good time to do it. I'm 29 right now, I'm gonna be 30 next year, so I feel like this is kind of the last list of my 20s, so to speak. And I think it's unique because a lot of the movies that I loved in my youth, they're like, I'm getting older, man, they're like classic rock now, so I feel like that's kind of fun, and that's why I say to people, look, if you want to go back and watch old movies, have at it. But don't be afraid to put your stake in the ground, because at the end of the day, the movies that you love today, 20 years from now, we could view them as classics, and guess what? You'll be out in front of it. It's important for me to note that this is a list of my 10 favorite movies of all time. This is not a list of the 10 best films ever made. I haven't seen every movie. I don't think I'm qualified to say what the best films are, but I just want that on record because you may see a movie or two on this list and say, how in the world does he think this movie is better than this movie? The fact is, I'm not saying it's necessarily better. I'm saying I enjoy watching it more. You could make the argument that this is a list of the 10 most rewatchable movies of my lifetime. I'm not a huge fan of honorable mentions because I feel like they're kind of redundant. I see people do top 10 lists and they have 20 honorable mentions. Like, at that point, the mentions aren't particularly honorable, but I do have 3 films that just missed the cut that I could see at some point in the future moving their way up into my top 10 favorite films of all time. You know, the opinions are fluid. Those 3 films are, off the bat, from 2006, Martin Campbell's Casino Royale. It's one of the most badass movies ever made. And this movie kind of ruined James Bond movies for me, where, like, it is so much better than what came before it, and it's so much better than anything that came after it. But man, you talk about a perfect way of reinventing a character. Fantastic direction, great character stuff, and an amazing performance by Daniel Craig as Bond. So many great lines and cool action sequences. I love Casino Royale. From 2003, Billy Ray's Shattered Glass. This has been in my top 10 in the past, even top 5. Great performances. I love the journalism element to this movie. It's like one of the most underrated movies ever made, to a point where, like, I'm almost like a broken record, where anytime somebody asks what's an underrated movie, I always say Shattered Glass. The only reason it's not top 10 is, like, I don't know, and we're talking about my favorite films here. It's very small, and it works because it's very small, but I think when you kind of look at this list, I went with stuff that's a little bit more grandiose. The last honorable mention that just missed the cut, and the one that I could see moving into my top 10 at some point over time, from 2010, David Fincher's The Social Network. Talk about a movie that has aged like a fine wine. I loved it when I first saw it. The performances are remarkable. This movie is like a beautiful dance, where everyone's just clicking and firing on all cylinders. The screenplay by Aaron Sorkin is just masterful. It's one of those movies that I watch it when it's on TV, every time it's on. I think, like I said, it's a timeless movie. This is going to sound crazy, but in terms of following the kind of rise and fall of a media mogul, I think The Social Network is kind of the 21st century equivalent to Citizen Kane. I think it's that important of a piece of cinema. Just missed my top 10 favorite films of all time list. So, without further ado, let's jump into it. This is Chris Castellani's top 10 favorite films of all time, starting with number 10 from 1994, Frank Darabont's masterpiece, The Shawshank Redemption. There's a reason why I threw the caveat out there of these being my favorite films and not necessarily the best, because if I was ranking this list based off best films, man, I don't know if there's a better movie than The Shawshank Redemption. This is just a brilliantly told story from every angle. I love the direction, I love the pacing, but the one consistent thing you're going to see with almost every movie on this list, the thing that matters the most to me is character stuff. To me, when I watch a movie, I am watching people's lives unfold for 2.5 hours. And if I'm not invested in those people's lives, I'm going to get bored very fast. If you're looking for a prime example of what good character development looks like, look no further than Darabont's The Shawshank Redemption. There's a reason why this movie has earned its status as one of the great films of all time. It is number 1, I believe, in terms of user ratings on IMDb, and it's very well deserved. I love it to death. Number 9, the first and only appearance of Marty Scorsese on this list, from 2013, The Wolf of Wall Street. You know, I was thinking about this the other day. People often say, we don't get big comedies like we used to, and I feel like we just get them in other forms, because to me, when you look at the humor that exists in Wolf of Wall Street, it is the big, like, raunchy comedy that everybody had the poster of in their freshman dorm in college. At least, you know I did. I think this movie is hysterically funny. Like, I think that this is one of the funniest movies ever, quite frankly. I think there's so many great lines of dialogue and the exchange between the characters. Like, it's over the top and it's hedonistic, but it's meant to be that way to kind of show the excess of Wall Street, or at least what it was in the 80s when it came out, or when it took place. This is, to me, is like the ultimate DiCaprio performance, because he's oozing charisma, but he's just such a scumbag in the movie, and you can tell he's having so much fun with it. Jonah Hill's amazing in this. Obviously, Margot Robbie, Maroon. But it's so well directed, and it has all the classic Scorsese staples, but it's tuned up to 11, and man, it really funny stuff. And pacing. It's almost a 3-hour movie, and it flies by. I remember I saw this in theaters with my family on Christmas Day. My senior year of high school. Love it. I love it more every time I watch it. It's so recognizable and so rewatchable. Chop will chop your fucking credit card in half. How about that? All right, moving on. Number 8. My number 8 favorite movie of all time. From 2000, Mary Harron's American Psycho. You know, this movie came out in 2000, but I feel like it's very steeped in that late to mid-90s edge, but it works. Tremendous style to this film, and this is actually one of the instances in which I've read the source material, I've read the book that this is based on. I prefer the film, and I know that they're remaking the movie in some capacity, I believe, and I hope they do it justice, but if you are going to readapt that novel, it's going to have to be a hardcore NC-17. I mean, the descriptions of violence and sex in that book, I almost vomited reading it. And what the angle they take with this, well, the original is satirical, and the original has its dark comedy elements. They go full dark comedy with this, and it's carried by just an otherworldly performance by Christian Bale. This is my favorite Bale performance. He just gets lost in this role, and it's a difficult character to pull off because he is a scumbag, and he's a yuppie, and he's totally egotistical, and yet, maybe I'm just a sick fuck. I think this movie's hilarious. I find Patrick Bateman, he's so up his own ass as a character that I laugh at this movie very consistently, and he is a big reason for that. Lots of great lines of dialogue, but I wish Mary Harron would direct more movies because, man, there is a very distinct, recognizable style to this. And she hasn't really done much beyond American Psycho, but yeah, this is a classic film. It's very worthy of the cult following it's gained over the last several decades. All right, number 7. This is the one that's going to raise the most eyebrows because every movie on this list, in some capacity, was very well received from a critical standpoint. This is the one where people are going to be like, really? And it did get nominated for a few Oscars, though they were technical Oscars. My number 7 favorite film of all time, from 2007, is Michael Bay's Transformers. Okay, hear me out. I saw this movie for the first time when I was 12 years old in July of 2007, and it blew my mind. It blew everyone's mind. The reason I love the first Transformers so much is not because of its deep or meaningful story, though, when you get to the end of this movie, and Optimus Prime is talking to Shia LaBeouf, and he says, "Sam, you sacrificed yourself for the cube," and he just goes, "No sacrifice, no victory." I get chills, I'm sorry, but the reason this works to me is that it is the greatest movie ever made by a 13-year-old boy. It is the ultimate teenage fulfillment fantasy movie. What do you want when you're that age? You want to be a part of a big robot adventure. You're the dorky protagonist in this thing that's so much greater than you. You have cool cars, you have robots, you have cars transforming into robots, punches, explosions, and you have one of the most beautiful women of all time riding shotgun. Now, I think that this movie works kind of on accident, to be completely honest with you, because I think that I don't believe Michael Bay is a smart enough filmmaker to have things like charm in his movies, but it does work in that capacity. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those movies that's very much a staple of its time. If there's a film I can compare it to, I think it's like the 2000s version of Independence Day. Like, Independence Day is a movie that a lot of people that grew up in the 90s love. I think Independence Day is, like, borders on god-awful at points. Like, it's bloated, it's long, every character is a stereotype. Oh, you'd all be dead if it wasn't for my David. And yet, there's people who love it. I feel that way about Transformers 2007, not the sequels. I think the sequels blow. I did like Rise of the Beast, but that was kind of disconnected from the Michael Bay films. Yeah, I mean, call me childish, but when Bumblebee pees on John Turturro's head, I laugh. I find a lot of the humor funny, and to this day, some of the greatest CG ever put on film. It looks better than the recent Transformers movies. I mean, that can't be overlooked. The technical elements of this, it is a marvel. It still is in 2007. You get, when those Transformers crash down to Earth and you see them transform for the very first time, chills, dude. You also have a really cool score in that movie as well. I love the first Transformers. I'll always defend it. Number 6, my number 6 favorite movie of all time from 2011. It's Bennett Miller's Moneyball. This is probably very unsurprising to people. If there's a movie that you feel like was probably made for Chris Castellani, it was Moneyball. But the reason it works is not for the reasons why you might think. Yes, I think the film does a great job of showing its work and explaining in very simple terms why this philosophy changed the game of baseball. And it is fun, as somebody who is a fan of that stuff, to see them talking about on-base percentage and talking about analytics and sabermetrics and how important they were to this team and how important they've become to Major League Baseball. But to me, the reason this movie works is that at its core, it's about a guy trying to learn to love the game of baseball again. And I think that there's a message at the end of this movie that really resonates. Brad Pitt is so good in this, and he's good in the way that he always is. He's always Mr. Cool. You know, he commands every scene, every room that he's in. But I love the relationship that he has with his daughter and the relationship that he has with the sport of baseball in this film. And that final scene when he's listening to his daughter singing, and the title card comes up that says Billy is still trying to win the last game of the year. That's such a powerful moment that I think really connects with a lot of baseball fans. Where, look, I mean, I'm a Tigers fan, right? You guys know I wear that on my sleeve, and there's a lot of disappointment, and yet there is always something fun and exciting about what the next season might have in store. There's always that hope that fans hold on to, the idea that one day we're going to win the last game. And even though this team didn't get it done, they did change the way that baseball players are scouted and looked at, even to this day. Bennett Miller needs to direct more movies. Bennett Miller is a great, great director. I love the way he directs the baseball sequences in this. I mean, the winning streak sequence on its own is just like a brilliant short film. I love the score for this. It's so instantly recognizably baseball to me. And that's why when people say, what's the best sports movie, what's the best baseball movie, to me it's Moneyball. And then there's everything else. It's my number 6 favorite film. My number 5 favorite movie of all time, another wildly underrated film, this one from 2011, Jonathan Levine's 50-50. I feel like this one goes overlooked. This is a comedy starring Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Seth Rogen, where Joseph Gordon-Levitt is diagnosed with cancer, and he fights as he tries to beat the odds and win the 50-50 battle against this disease. Like, a comedy about cancer, it's a big risk, and it's why I understand why this movie probably wasn't the biggest hit at the box office, but it is so unbelievably human. And I think that the screenwriters for this, Evan Goldberg, who helped write this, I think with Seth Rogen, it's so sincere. It is based on a true story in some capacity, and the performances here are so great. The chemistry between Seth Rogen and Joseph Gordon-Levitt is just off the charts. I mean, you laugh hard at this. I love Seth Rogen. I think this is probably his best performance. He's great in this, man. He's hilarious. And the way that everyone kind of handles his diagnosis, Joseph Gordon-Levitt's diagnosis, differently, it's very fascinating. You have the mother who just keeps trying to smother him. You have the therapist who's just trying to do what's best for him. You have Joseph Gordon-Levitt who's trying to keep his composure as everyone around him is sort of freaking out. And then you have Seth Rogen who, through a majority of the movie, is just trying to get him laid. Lots of funny stuff, but it's one of those movies that, considering the subject matter, you feel like could very easily be a tonal mess. And yet when the dramatic beats come in this movie, man, the driving scene, like, oh my God. I remember watching this for the first time on my iPod Touch, that's how old I am, my sophomore year of high school, and just weeping, dude. Like, this is an amazing, amazing film, wildly underrated. Does it have the most perfect cinematography? No. Does it have the deepest, most meaningful message? No. But man, it's just one of those movies that in its simplicity is just kind of perfect. I love 50-50. Number 4, this is the most recent film on this list. My number 4 favorite movie of all time, from 2021, Steven Spielberg's West Side Story. Yes, I know I've waxed poetic and just gone nuts all about this movie for the last several years, but I'm sorry, I've rewatched this at least half a dozen times, and I like it more every time I watch it. I think it is the most brilliantly directed movie, like, ever. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but I remember in my original review for this, which is still on YouTube, I talked about how the separation between this film and every other film in 2021 was like, the gap was massive. It was really, really incredible, and I still feel that way watching it now, where there's just a magic to the way that Spielberg directs this. It's one of those movies to me that is the prime example of how you do a remake in Hollywood, because I love the original. I almost had the original film in my top 10 favorites list, but the original film is a perfect 1961 movie. The remake is a perfect 2021 movie, and there's so many places where they could have tried to update it or modernize it in a way that would have felt very insincere, and yet it is so earnestly directed by Spielberg. You can tell he loves this source material. I like the screenplay for this a ton. I think the way that they update the characters, the new things that they do, it justifies a remake existing. It doesn't take away from the greatness of the original, but in a lot of ways enhances what is already tremendous source material. I mean, incredible music. West Side Story is one of the best soundtracks of any musical, but I just think that the way that they flesh out the characters, the main characters in this, it's why I like it more than the original. Riff was always my favorite character in the ensemble. I think Mike Faced in this movie, this is one of my favorite performances, not just of the decade, but like ever. I think he added, and the screenplay as well, added a different element, a more heartbreaking element to Riff that didn't exist in some of the previous iterations. The movie, like I said, the word that comes to mind, it just feels magical. Now, it has a ton of sad moments. It is very tragic as well, but even the moments where things get very heavy, there's a lot of legitimate tension, which I feel like is kind of hard to pull off in a musical, but when you're talking about the guy who directed Saving Private Ryan, he's able to pull it off. This was proof that Steven Spielberg still has his 100-mile-per-hour fastball in his back pocket. Look, if you don't like musicals, you're probably not going to like this one, but even if you don't, I think on a filmmaking technical level, there are so many things about this that are so brilliant. It just looks dazzling. I love me some West Side Story. It's my number 4 favorite film. Number 3, I'm cheating a little bit because we have a tie. And number 3, we have a tie between 1977 Star Wars A New Hope, directed by George Lucas, and 1980's The Empire Strikes Back, directed by Irvin Kershner. I wanted to put the entire original Star Wars trilogy on here, but I'll be honest, every time I watch Return of the Jedi, I like it a little bit less. Love the ending, love the third act, but it's just not as good as the other two. So I have the original 2 on here. I mean, you know, they're incredible movies. They're both 10 out of 10s, but they are also kind of different from each other. The first one, I think, is like the most accessible blockbuster ever. I think it's a sci-fi epic for people who might not even like those kind of movies, and it works because you believe in the characters, and, I mean, on a technical element, the score, the effects, groundbreaking stuff. Like, people don't understand, a lot of people don't understand how much the original Star Wars film changed the way that movies are shot. And, you know, this was in an age before CG, and you're using a lot of miniatures and a lot of props, and it still looks really darn good for 1977. The Empire Strikes Back is the best Star Wars movie. It's darker. It's, in many ways, the ultimate sequel. It kind of laid the template of how you make a darker sequel to a really popular original film where the stakes are much higher, the characters are more fleshed out. Empire, to me, is the one where Vader, the threat of him looms the largest. He's just a fierce, just beast in this one. Of course, you have the very famous twist at the end. You know, Star Wars drives me nuts because I want to love it, right? And yet they do a lot of things that make me mad. But I think, while I don't want them remaking these movies by any means, I do think that these original 2 films, and Jedi to a certain extent, really laid out the foundation of how you make these movies good, which is, look, world building is cool, right? And seeing new planets and new effects, that's fine. But, I mean, even Lucas has said it, an effect without a story is nothing. Special effects are just a tool. And the reason these movies work is that the human characters feel human. Like, and I think Harrison Ford as Han Solo is a huge, like, reason for that, is he's the one guy who's kind of experiencing what we're experiencing. And he's funny, and he's witty, and he's charming. And then you have, you know, the hero on a journey. It's classic American cinema with a science fiction twist. I mean, I've seen these movies so many times. I can't really wax poetic about Star Wars because so many other people have already done it. I've already done it, but that's a tie at number 3. At number 2, my second favorite movie of all time, from the year 2014, my second favorite movie ever, is Damien Chazelle's Whiplash. And I'll be honest with you guys, this is almost number 1. And I could see myself doing a list at some point when I'm in my 30s, and this moves its way up to number 1 on this list. I think that this is a perfect fucking movie. Like, there is not a single thing about this movie that I would change at all. I think it is a masterpiece of tension and anxiety. The way that Chazelle directs it, this was his first feature film. You can't breathe during certain sequences of this movie. It feels like almost claustrophobic with the tension that he's able to create and the dynamic between these main characters. Miles Teller, very good in this as a guy who's just pushing to be one of the greats, who's just obsessed with wanting to be one of the next great jazz drummers. And there's so many great moments of cinematography, and I love the color palette of this movie, the way it's shot. Like I said, it's anxious, it's intense, it's fierce. But the highlight of the film is that you have probably the most memorable character from any movie of the last 15 years, Terrence Fletcher, played by the amazing J.K. Simmons, one of the best antagonists in any movie. And I would love to interview J.K. Simmons someday, future Chris and Company guest, maybe. Let's speak it into existence. He's a huge Tiger fan, because I would like to know how he reacted to reading this script, because every single line that Terrence Fletcher has in this movie is memorable. And not only, look, it's not just memorable because of the screaming and because of the abuse. The fact is, even while watching this movie, and I've seen it multiple times, many times, I'm still not sure who's correct. There's still a part of me that thinks, man, as crazy as Fletcher is, he kind of has a point. Maybe the next great one would never quit. Maybe in order to get the most out of people, you do have to push them to limits beyond what's expected. Now, of course, he does it in a way that's fucking abusive, right? But at the same time, I don't know. He's amazing in this. This is one of my favorite performances in any movie. And the final sequence, man. climax to this film. This is how dumb studio executives are. There is a story out there that a studio executive, after watching this movie, handed Damien Chazelle a note and said they should cut down the final sequence, and his reasoning was, he's good at drumming. We get it. People just don't understand. Some people are not smart people. The final sequence in this movie is maybe my favorite sequence in any film, quite frankly. It's what happens when masterful editing, masterful direction, masterful storytelling, and masterful acting all come together in this one perfect blend. It's a perfect movie, man. And I really do love the fact I watched this my first night college when I transferred to CMU in winter of 2015. Blew my balls off, and I really love the fact that it has developed the following that it has over the last 10 years. In fact, I think there's going to be a re-release in theaters. I never saw this movie in theaters. I'd love to see it on the big screen at some point. Memorable scene after memorable scene, intense, anxiety-inducing scene. God, I love it. Whiplash, like I said, man, pushing up on number one. But the reason it's not number one is because, like I said, the version of me that existed watching Whiplash in 2015 for the first time, his critical lens is largely dependent on a movie that he saw for the first time in July of 2008, and it kind of changed the way that he views movies. My favorite movie of all time, from 2008, Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight. Now, look, nostalgia is a huge part of this. It is nostalgia-based, right? I saw this for the first time when I was 13, and people don't understand, people say Avengers Endgame was the biggest movie ever, and financially it was, but maybe it's just I was young, and pop culture is so heightened at that point in your life. This was an event. The world felt like it stopped for Batman. And this was one of those rare instances where the biggest movie of the year, the summer blockbuster everyone was looking forward to, was also the best film of the year. I've seen this movie more than any other movie. I could quote it almost verbatim at this point. And I think what separates it from so many summer blockbuster films, especially comic movies, is one, it's made by one of the greatest filmmakers ever. I mean, Christopher Nolan has proven himself, he's now an Academy Award winner, to be one of the elite filmmakers of all time. I mean, to say he's a modern-day Kubrick is maybe a bit much, but I think he has Kubrick's visual sensibilities, but I think his storytelling is actually in a lot of ways better than Kubrick's. I think his writing and screenplays are better than a lot of what Kubrick was able to do with some of his films. Just an iconic movie to look at, but I think what separates it is the fact that it's a very simple premise. The villain's motivation is not some convoluted thing where he's trying to get, and I like these movies, right? But he's not trying to get some magic gauntlet or trying to take a bunch of money. It's a movie about a guy who just really likes seeing bad things happen. As Alfred says, he just wants to watch the world burn. And that is carried by the greatest performance ever by Heath Ledger, the late, great Heath Ledger as the Joker. I mean, people knew when this movie came out, this character was iconic right away. He was on every shirt. He was all over television. And people came out of the theater saying, "Why so serious, sir? Let's put a smile on that face." It's glorious, right? It was one of the most memorable characters in the history of cinema. And as amazing as he is, I almost feel like sometimes people do this movie a disservice when they say, it's really great, but it's more of a Joker movie than it is a Batman movie. Batman doesn't really have an arc. He sure as fuck does. And I think in a lot of ways, Christian Bale's version of Batman has become underrated as people are so focused on the voice and the way he talks. Okay, it's a little silly. Right? He's also given far and away the best dialogue. He's given some great material, but he absolutely has an arc. The movie is about Batman, who through this entire first two films of this trilogy, and I love this entire series. Throughout the first two films of this trilogy, he's like, I want to be a symbol of hope. I want to be the hero. I want to be the guy that people look up to. And he realizes at the end of this film, I have to be whatever Gotham needs me to be. And he makes a huge sacrifice in order for his city just to stay upright. And Jim Gordon, his final speech at the end, it gives you chills. Hans Zimmer scores. Oh, God, I can hear that fucking Batmobile just chugging, right? Doom, doom, bow, 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 bow. I feel bad for Aaron Eckhart, man, who I feel like should have become a bigger star. He's so good as Harvey Dent. I actually think he gives a borderline Oscar-worthy performance in this. The big problem is he's just so overshadowed by the greatness of Heath Ledger, but there's two big iconic villains in this, and they do Two-Face right, and that's a heartbreaking portrayal that he gives of Harvey Dent. This movie, the reason it is number one right now, through my 20s at least, is the fact that the way that I judge so many films nowadays, in a lot of ways, connects back to the way that I view The Dark Knight. Because 2008, we'd seen a lot of great comic book movies. The first two Sam Raimi Spider-Mans were, you could almost call them honorable mentions on this list. We'd seen comic book movies that worked. But Nolan said, what if we took this character, and he did this with Batman Begins as well, and with Rises, and we grounded him in this sense of reality and made something more imaginative and different than what anybody else has seen. You know, on paper, and as much as I love Batman, on paper, the idea of, hey, there's a guy who dresses up like a giant rodent and beats people, you know, with his bare fists in nights, stopping crimes, and his villain is a guy in clown makeup. It's kind of silly, but a movie like The Dark Knight proves that you can take any idea, any premise, and give it a level of imagination and ground it in a sense of reality where it is endlessly noticeable and endlessly entertaining. And that's why when I see a movie that I hate it when people come out of movies and say, well, you know what, I thought the story was dumb and the acting was bad and the direction was horrible, but it was a fun little movie. There's no such thing. Because The Dark Knight to me established there's nothing wrong with maintaining high expectations. This is how good these movies can be. Now, I'm not going into, I don't know, The Tale of Despero. It was an animated movie from 2008, expecting it to be The Dark Knight. But The Dark Knight set the precedent of you don't have to look at big summer blockbusters as just big, dumb spectacle. I love the first Transformers movie. It's in my top 10. That's big, dumb spectacle. Now, it's big, dumb spectacle that works, right? But you can take a big budget film and you can tell it from an artful standpoint. It can have a legit message. It was made in 2008, and that message of chaos and really terrorism, which is what the Joker is. He's a terrorist. You know, it still connects. It's a timeless movie, and the memories I have of seeing it and the hype behind it, for the time being, I can't knock it off of that number one spot, in my opinion. I just think it's a marvelous movie. It's a comic book movie made for people that don't like comic book movies, and the comic book stuff in it, like the action's so good, man, dude. Bro, when the Batpod emerges from the Batmobile, from the tumbler, and he does the flip over the wall, that's fucking cool, man. I feel this way about the entire trilogy, and I did do a video essay on this. It's still on this channel. I think during COVID I made it. But we're going to look back in this trilogy and say, wow, how fortunate were we that all of these actors, Academy Award-winning actors, came together with Christopher Nolan, and they told the Dark Knight trilogy. I mean, they told their story, and this is the definitive film of that series, and for me, it's the definitive film of my lifetime. It's my favorite movie of all time. So that'll do it. What are your favorite movies? What's your favorite movie on this list? What movie are you surprised is on this list? What movie are you surprised isn't on this list? Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button. Let's get those watch hours up and spread the word. We're trying to grow an audience here. Continue to follow Chris and company. Shout out to Austin Sisler, who continues to make me look good. The artist behind the lens with the production. Yeah, I appreciate all the support during what's been kind of a strange time. But, you know, I love creating content, and I love talking to my audience. And I think that this video will play. So I really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for staying to the end. If you did, have a great rest of your day. Peace and happiness.
My man love television.